Every clock tick in the living room sounded like a countdown. The air smelled faintly of dust, wood polish, and the coffee I hadn't touched. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, a picture of composure. Across from me, Marcus Adler adjusted his dark tie and glanced toward the door. My heart, however, didn't beat with fear anymore. It beat with finality. For 40 years, I'd been David Winslow's mother. Today, I would finally be his lesson. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the heater. My late husband Thomas had built that heater himself, back when we couldn't afford repairs. It still worked better than most things that had been bought since he died. When Thomas passed 3 years ago, I thought I'd buried my stability with him. But it turned out what I'd really buried was my sense of boundaries. The front door opened. His familiar voice followed. "Mom, you home?" I didn't answer. Marcus gave me a look steady, professional, but filled with that subtle empathy only people who've seen too much heartbreak can have. "You're sure you want to go through with this, Mrs. Winslow?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "If I don't do it today, I never will." The door creaked again, then his footsteps, my son's footsteps, crossed the hallway. I could picture his grin before I saw it. Polite, fake, charming in that way he'd learned to use since he realized charm opens wallets faster than keys. He turned the corner, wearing a fitted navy blazer, and that same crooked smile. "There you are, Mom. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was..." He froze. The smile vanished. Marcus stood and extended his hand. "Good morning. I'm Marcus Adler, attorney at law." David blinked. "Attorney?" His eyes darted from Marcus to me. "Mom, what's going on?" I didn't stand. I didn't tremble. "Sit down, David." He laughed softly, like it was all some mistake. "Wait, this a joke? You hired a lawyer?" The silence that followed made the clock on the wall seem deafening. He looked between us again, frowning now, his confidence slipping. "Mom, talk to me." "I've talked enough over the years," I said evenly. "Now you'll listen." The room felt like it shifted, the way a tide pulls before it breaks. He sat, though not out of respect, out of confusion. Marcus adjusted his briefcase, setting it carefully on the table. "We'll begin whenever you're ready," he said to me. But I wasn't ready to start with documents and evidence. I needed him to understand why we were here. "Before I tell you what this is," I said softly, "I want to ask you something. Do you remember when your father died? How you came by every week for dinner, made sure I ate, made me laugh?" He nodded cautiously. "Of course, you did that for about 3 months," I said. Then the requests began. He stiffened. "Mom, please." I held up a hand. Every month, a new excuse. The car, the rent, the course, the furniture, the trips. Every time I said yes, you said, "You're the best, Mom. I'll pay you back." You never did. He leaned forward, his voice breaking. "I told you I would. You just kept taking." My voice didn't rise, but it sliced through the air like glass. He stared at the table. I looked at Marcus. "Show him." The lawyer opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder thick, organized, precise. When he laid it flat, I saw David's hands twitch, his knuckles tightening. Inside the folder were printed bank transfers, text messages, and photos, dozens of them. Each line a date, each date a betrayal. "This," Marcus said, "is an official record of your mother's financial transfers to your account over the past 3 years, totaling $51,200. David's face drained of color. "That's not, Mom, that's not how it looks." I turned slightly toward him. "I know how it looks. I've seen the pictures. Cabo, the restaurants, the gold watch. I also heard Lydia at the grocery store, bragging to her friend about how easy I am to manipulate." His head jerked up. "You what?" "Oh yes," I said. "She called me a milk cow, said when the milk ran out, you'd sell the barn." He opened his mouth, but I leaned forward before he could speak. "I carried you for 9 months, David. Fed you with my body. I built a home so you'd never feel hungry or scared, and you took that love and made it your currency." He dropped his face into his hands. "Mom, please don't." "No, listen to me." My voice cracked once but held steady after. I spent decades believing that being a good mother meant forgiving everything. But forgiveness without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. Marcus remained quiet, his pen poised over the folder like a witness in a courtroom. "Mrs. Winslow," he said gently, Would you like to explain why I'm here? I nodded. I've asked Mr. Adler to handle the legal side of what comes next. You'll be receiving a formal settlement proposal, a repayment plan for what you've taken. You'll sign it today. David lifted his head, eyes red. You're suing me? No, I said quietly. I'm saving what's left of me. He looked at me as though I were a stranger. Maybe I was. The mother he knew, the one who cried quietly and handed him envelopes of cash, was gone. In her place sat a woman who had finally remembered what self-respect felt like. He pushed back from the chair, standing too fast. You'll regret this. You'll die alone, Mom. I stood too, meeting his eyes. I've been alone since the day you started calling me your backup plan. Marcus rose slowly. Mr. Winslow, if you refuse to sign, we'll proceed through formal channels. I advise you not to. David's jaw tightened. Then, with trembling hands, he took the pen Marcus slid across the table. The sound of the pen scratching paper felt like an ending and a beginning. When he was done, he set the pen down, breathing heavily. I hope you're happy. No, I said softly. But I'm free. He turned, stormed out, and slammed the door. The frame rattled, but my heart didn't. For a moment, I stood still. Marcus gathered the papers and closed his briefcase. You did it, he said. Most people never do. I looked out the window where the autumn light touched the apple tree Thomas had planted decades ago. It's strange, I whispered. I thought this would hurt more. He smiled faintly. Maybe you already felt all the hurt there was. The clock ticked on. I exhaled slowly and sat back down. My hands steady now. This is where the story begins, I said to no one in particular. Not with anger, with awakening. And if you're still listening, if you've ever loved someone who used your kindness as their currency, I want you to stay with me. What happened next will make you question everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and the price of peace. The day Thomas died, the world fell silent. No thunder, no cry, not even the wail of an ambulance could compete with the stillness that followed. He was watering the garden, humming something off-key, then the hose went limp in his hand, and the water just kept spilling, useless, onto the grass. People talk about losing a spouse like it's a single moment, a clean wound. It isn't. It's a slow suffocation that happens over months. I'd wake up in the night, reaching for his warmth, and find only the hollow left behind. The house that had once been too small for our laughter suddenly felt too big for my grief. That's when David started visiting more. At first, it was sweet. He brought my favorite muffins from a bakery in Portland, fixed the dripping faucet, sat beside me on the porch while the evening light slipped through the trees. He said he didn't want me to be alone. I believed him. I needed to believe him. When you're drowning, you'll grab even the hand that's pulling you deeper. He came every weekend for months. We'd talk about everything: his work, his new projects, the company that might promote him. I'd beam with pride, pretending not to notice when he checked his phone too often. Sometimes, I'd tell him stories about his father, about how Thomas never threw away a single letter I wrote him during our courtship. David would smile, but his eyes drifted elsewhere. One afternoon, he brought someone with him. This is Lydia, he said, standing on the porch with the kind of grin men wear when they've made a decision you can't undo. She was beautiful, sleek hair, diamond studs, perfume that smelled expensive. She kissed the air near my cheek and called me Mrs. Winslow, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I offered her tea. She declined. She said caffeine made her anxious. They sat on the couch, while I fussed with the sugar bowl, pretending not to notice how Lydia's eyes swept over the room, cataloging every piece of furniture, every photo frame, every object that told the story of a modest but full life. When they left, my neighbor Nancy popped over, pretending to borrow sugar. Well, she said, settling into a chair, that one looks like she was born in a boutique. Nancy, I laughed weakly. You're impossible. She's trouble, Nancy said simply. I can smell it, like perfume on a bill collector. I brushed her off, but my stomach had already nodded. 3 months later, David called with the news. Mom, I proposed to Lydia. She said yes. His voice trembled with pride, and for a moment, I was proud too. But behind his excitement, I sensed something off. A hurried edge. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I said. Do you need any help planning? He hesitated. Actually, yeah, about that. And that was the beginning of the end. He came over the next day with his boyish smile and a notebook full of wedding expenses. He talked about venue deposits and catering costs, like it was a shared dream, not a financial burden. When he finally said the number $9,000, I flinched. "David, that's a lot of money." "I know, Mom, but it's not forever. I'll pay you back as soon as I get my bonus." I wanted to believe him. I did believe him. I went to the small tin box in my dresser, the one that still smelled faintly of Thomas's cologne, and pulled out the savings we'd built together. 3 decades of small sacrifices. When I handed the check to David, his eyes softened. "Thank you, Mom. You're the best." For a brief moment, I felt useful again. Needed. Loved. If only I'd known I was financing my own heartbreak. The wedding was beautiful, lavish, gold and cream, with white lilies that smelled like debt. David looked radiant. Lydia looked victorious. I sat in the last row, my heart both swelling and sinking at once. At the reception, I overheard Lydia laughing with one of her friends near the open bar. "Good thing my mother-in-law paid up," she said. "We'd be married in a parking lot without her." Her friend snickered. "Lucky you. My husband's mom's broke." Lydia smirked. "Mine's sentimental. Guilt's the best currency." I froze. The music kept playing. The laughter continued, and I stood there clutching my champagne glass so hard I thought it would crack. That night, I went home early, slipping away before the last dance. The drive was quiet. The ring on my finger felt heavier than ever, the symbol of a marriage built on loyalty, now outshone by a marriage built on lies. When I got home, I opened the notebook I used for grocery lists and wrote the date. First withdrawal, $9,000. Purpose, love disguised as duty. I didn't know then that I'd be adding a new line every month for the next 3 years. After that, his visits became less about company and more about calculation. A favor here, a small request there. His tone changed to less son, more salesman. By the time I realized what was happening, I'd already taught him the one lesson no mother should ever teach her child, that her love would never say no. If you've ever felt someone take and take until you're hollow but still calling it love, stay with me. Because what came next wasn't just betrayal, it was the slow death of a mother's faith and the beginning of her rebirth. The first time I gave David money, I told myself it was love. The second time, I told myself it was temporary. By the third, I stopped pretending it was anything but survival, his, not mine. It started small. 2 months after the wedding, David showed up unannounced on a Friday afternoon. I was taking a roast out of the oven when I heard his key turning in the lock. "Mom, you home?" That voice. The same one that used to call out when he was 6 years old, mud on his shoes, holding up a frog like it was treasure. "Kitchen," I said. He walked in with his usual half smile, the kind that tried to look confident but couldn't quite hide the nerves underneath. "Smells good. You're spoiling yourself." "I have to. No one else will." I smiled back, but my chest tightened when I noticed how thin he looked, tired, distracted. "Everything okay, son?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mom, I hate asking, but we could use a little help." I didn't ask what "we" meant. I already knew. He sat at the table, spinning my old salt shaker between his fingers. "We just moved into a new apartment. Lydia wants to get some proper furniture, you know, grown-up stuff. We're sitting on folding chairs right now." I almost laughed. Folding chairs weren't death sentences, but his voice trembled just enough to stir the old instinct in me. The one that said, "Fix it, Mom." "How much?" I asked quietly. He looked up quickly, almost relieved. "Just 4,000, maybe 4,500. I'll pay you back in 2 months. Promise." Promises, I've learned, are the currency of manipulators. They're worth everything until you try to cash them in. "Let me see what I can do," I said. His shoulders dropped, tension dissolving instantly. "Thanks, Mom. You have no idea how much this helps." But I did. I knew exactly how much. $4,500, to be precise, enough to pay 2 months of my mortgage, enough to cover my blood pressure medication for a year. That night, I transferred the money. He texted a heart emoji, nothing else. 3 weeks passed. No call, no visit. It was Nancy who asked first. "Seen your boy's new place yet?" I hesitated, stirring sugar into my coffee. "Yes, lovely," I lied. She frowned. "Julie, sorry. Clara, you can't keep covering for him. You look thinner every week." I'm fine, I said too fast. He's under pressure. It's just a rough patch. Nancy leaned back, folding her arms. Rough patches end, users don't. I wanted to defend him, but the words turned to dust in my mouth. Then came the next month. Mom, the car broke down, he said over the phone. Mechanic says I need a new alternator. It's over $2,000. I told him I'd transfer it after the weekend. When I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the black screen of my phone. My eyes looked tired. Not old, just tired, like they'd seen too much of what people do to those who love them. By April, there were 3 more transfers. $2,800 for the car, $5,000 for credit card interest, $1,200 for work equipment. He always said it with that same wounded voice, gentle, apologetic, rehearsed. I began writing each payment in my notebook, at first for memory's sake, then for survival. March, $4,500, furniture. April, $2,800, car repère. May, $5,000, debt relief. June, $1,200, work tools. The notebook began to fill up, one neat, shaking line after another. Each page was a quiet confession of my cowardice. One night, I opened Facebook and scrolled through his photos. Lydia in a white blazer, holding champagne. David smiling at a rooftop bar. Hashtags, number success, number couple goals, number new beginnings. I zoomed in. Her nails were polished emerald green, the same color as my kitchen curtains. It struck me that I'd paid for both. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went into the kitchen, made tea, and sat in the dark. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. I reached for my notebook again and added a line. July, $2,000, root canal for Lydia. I stopped and stared at the page. Something about that last entry made me tremble. Not because of the money, but because I realized I no longer needed a reason. He didn't have to manipulate me anymore. I was doing it to myself. The days blurred after that. I began budgeting my life around his emergencies. I cut coupons, stopped buying beef, split pills in half to make prescriptions last. I told Nancy I was trying a healthier diet. She didn't believe me. One morning she appeared on my doorstep with a bag of groceries. I know you didn't ask, she said, but I couldn't sleep knowing you were living on crackers and coffee. I tried to smile. You're a good friend. I'm a stubborn one, she said, squeezing my hand. You can't fix him by breaking yourself. I wanted to argue, but her words hit too close to the truth. Still, every 5th of the month, my stomach would tighten. That was payday. That was when the phone would ring or the doorbell would chime or a text would come through saying, "Mom, are you home?" He always started with that same small talk. "How's your blood pressure? Are you eating enough?" Then came the sigh, the hesitation, the lead-in. I hate to ask, but it was always something. A bill, a course, an emergency that only love could solve. I started to resent my own ringtone. And yet, I kept saying yes. Because saying no felt like betrayal. Because guilt is heavier than gold. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the maple trees, I opened my notebook again. I counted each line, added the numbers. The total stared back at me. $26,400. That was almost my entire savings. I stared at the total until it blurred into nothing. Then I whispered into the empty room, "Thomas, what would you do?" The silence answered back. He'd probably shake his head, touch my shoulder, and say, "Clara, love is not alone. Stop giving what no one values." I closed the notebook and tucked it beneath the drawer of my nightstand. For the first time, the act felt less like hiding and more like documenting evidence. Because something deep inside me, the part that had been quiet too long, was beginning to wake. If you've ever found yourself loving someone so blindly that you mistake surrender for kindness, you'll understand what comes next. Because the truth doesn't come all at once, it seeps in slowly, like water through a crack. And once it starts, you can't stop it from flooding everything you thought was safe. The requests didn't stop, they just changed their costumes. Each new month arrived like a magician's act. Different props, same trick. By August, David said he was signing up for a professional certification course, something about analytics, something that would change his life. I remember how hopeful he looked, and that single word, course, sounded noble enough to disguise the truth. He needed $3,000. He promised to repay me before the holidays. He even hugged me tighter than usual that day. 2 weeks later, I saw a post of him and Lydia dining at a new seafood restaurant downtown. Lobster tails, wine, her wearing pearls. The caption read, "Rewarding ourselves after a long week. Number blessed number, lover forever." I nearly dropped my phone. I didn't comment. I didn't even like the post. But that photo burned into me because I realized that every lobster claw, every pearl, every smile had been bought with my sacrifices. In September, it was Lydia's wisdom teeth. In October, her mother's hospital bills. In November, a business investment. By December, I wasn't giving him money anymore. I was transferring oxygen from my lungs into his. The more he asked, the less of me there was. One cold morning, I walked to the post office to mail a birthday card to an old friend. On the way back, I stopped outside the bakery window where David used to buy me muffins. Inside, a mother was laughing with her son. The boy was maybe 10, wild hair, chocolate on his cheek, holding his mother's hand like it was sacred. I had to step away. My throat burned. When I got home, I sat in the kitchen and opened my notebook again. I'd stopped using neat handwriting by then. The numbers sprawled across the page, messy and rushed like they were screaming. 9, 2, 500, investment. Dec, $3,5, Lydia's surgery. Jan, $2,200, car insurance. I flipped through, counting the lines, and when I hit the bottom, I froze. The total now read $41,700. The pen slipped from my hand. I stared at that number until the page blurred from tears I hadn't even felt coming. That night, Nancy knocked. She didn't ask permission to come in, she just did. "Clara, you look pale. You've lost more weight." I wanted to tell her the truth, but shame has its own gravity. It pulls your words down before they can escape. "I'm fine, Nancy." She wasn't fooled. "He's asking again, isn't he?" I said nothing. She reached across the table, her weathered hand finding mine. "Sweetheart, you're letting him hollow you out. That's not motherhood, it's martyrdom." The words stung, but it was the truth I wasn't ready to face. That Christmas, I decorated the house anyway. Old ornaments, a cracked angel figurine on top of the tree. I roasted a small chicken and poured myself 1 glass of wine. David called that evening. "Sorry, Mom. We're flying out tomorrow for a little getaway, Cancun. Lydia's been so stressed. She needs this." "Cancun," I repeated softly. "Yeah, don't worry. It's a great deal. We used our credit card points." The silence stretched long enough for him to fill it with guilt. "You're not mad, are you?" "No, son," I said quietly. "I'm tired." He laughed nervously. "Don't be dramatic, Mom. You always worry too much." When the call ended, I sat staring at the tree lights reflecting off the empty chair where Thomas used to sit, and then I whispered to that absence, "He's killing me one kindness at a time." The following weeks were a blur of fatigue. I started skipping breakfast to stretch my groceries. The house felt heavier, like the walls had absorbed every lie. I kept thinking of something Thomas once told me when David was a teenager. A parent's job is to raise their child's spine, not carry it. I had failed that test. I'd carried him so long, his back forgot how to hold itself upright. Then came the first truly cruel lie. One February night, David called, his voice trembling. "Mom, I didn't want to scare you, but Lydia's pregnant. It's early, but it's risky. We need some special vitamins, extra tests, a new insurance plan." For a moment, the world brightened. I pressed my hand over my mouth, tears springing instantly. Pregnant? Oh, David. It was the first hope I'd felt in years, a chance to be a grandmother, to fill the house again with laughter. "How much do you need?" I asked before he even finished the sentence. He sighed. "Maybe around 5,000, just to get started." $5,000 for hope. I gave it willingly. The next morning, I went out and bought 2 skeins of yarn, one pink, one blue. I started crocheting a baby blanket. Every stitch felt like a prayer, a promise that all this giving, all this pain, had finally found purpose. I imagined tiny fingers clutching that blanket, imagined hearing Thomas's laugh echoing from wherever he was, proud of our family continuing. 3 weeks later, that hope died. I saw Lydia's post on social media, a picture of her at a wine bar with her friends, glass raised high, red lipstick perfect. The caption read, "To freedom, friendship, and feeling fabulous. No baby bump, no care, no shame." The half-finished blanket slipped from my hands to the floor. I didn't call him right away. I waited. I needed to be sure. So I checked her photos again, more nights out, more travel, more luxury. There was no pregnancy. There had never been one. I sat in the dark that night, clutching that pink and blue yarn to my chest like a dead child. That was the night my love for him didn't die, it transformed. It hardened. It sharpened. Because pain that deep doesn't vanish. It evolves into something colder. And mine evolved into resolve. If you've ever trusted someone so completely that betrayal didn't just break your heart, but dismantled your faith in love itself, you'll understand what came next. Because I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I planned. The night I discovered the pregnancy was a lie, I didn't sleep. Not because of anger. Anger was too clean for what I felt. It was grief, twisted into disbelief. I kept pacing the kitchen, my bare feet brushing against the cold tile, the half-finished baby blanket staring up at me from the table like an accusation. The yarn was still soft between my fingers, pink and blue threads intertwined in delicate stitches, now mocking me with their tenderness. That blanket wasn't for a grandchild. It was for a ghost. By dawn, I had memorized the details of that photo. Lydia's smug smile, the champagne glass, the caption dripping with arrogance. Freedom, friendship, fabulous. She wasn't even pretending anymore. I picked up my phone, typed, "David, we need to talk," then deleted it. What could I say that he hadn't already twisted before? The truth, I realized, had no power over those who profit from lies. 3 days later, I went grocery shopping. I don't even know why I walked into Rosewood Market, the high-end place downtown where a jar of olives cost more than my week's groceries. Maybe I wanted to remember what it felt like to exist in a world where money wasn't an enemy. Maybe I just needed to feel human again. The store smelled of polished wood and citrus cleaner. The shelves gleamed under warm lights. For a moment, I almost forgot who I was until I heard laughter. Her laughter, Lydia's voice, sharp and sweet as poison, carried across the aisle. I froze behind a display of imported olive oil, my hands gripping the cart handle until my knuckles turned white. She was standing in the wine section, her manicured fingers trailing over bottles like she was choosing jewelry. Another woman stood beside her, a blonde with expensive sunglasses perched on her head. Their cart was overflowing with imported cheese, Belgian chocolate, and wines that cost more than my mortgage. Then I heard it. "Sweetheart," Lydia said, loud enough for half the aisle to hear, "I told you that old woman will believe anything." The blonde laughed. "Seriously? She fell for it again?" "Of course," Lydia said, checking the label on a bottle. "David just has to sound desperate, say it's urgent, and she wires the money. Easy. She's sentimental. And guilt is the best tool, trust me." They both laughed. I couldn't move. My heart slammed against my ribs like it wanted out. "She even believed the pregnancy story?" the friend asked. "Oh, that was my favorite," Lydia said with a smirk. $5,000 for vitamins and special tests. You should have seen her face when David told her. So proud to be a grandma. Pathetic. Really, pathetic. That word burned through me, hotter than fire. The blonde shook her head, amused. "Don't you ever feel bad?" Lydia shrugged. "For what? She's old. Lives alone in that big house collecting dust. She gets a pension every month. What's she going to do with all that money? Leave it to the government? At least we're enjoying life." The blonde snorted. "And the trip to Mexico? Oh, that?" Lydia grinned. David told her his laptop broke and he needed money for work. She sent $3,000 in a heartbeat. We had the best time. Their laughter echoed. My throat closed. I wanted to storm over, to scream, to throw every word like a stone, but something inside me stopped. It wasn't fear. It was revelation. This wasn't about confronting them. It was about ending them quietly. Because that's what real justice is, not a slap in public, but a reckoning in silence. I left the store without buying a thing. I don't even remember walking to the car. I just remember sitting behind the wheel, gripping it until my palms hurt, whispering to myself, "Enough." When I got home, I pulled out my notebook, the one I'd been keeping since the first request, and opened it on the kitchen table. The last entry read, "Feb, $5, baby's prenatal care." I turned the page, took my pen, and wrote in bold letters across the top, "Total, $47,300. The price of love misplaced." I stared at the number until it stopped being numbers and became a story, my story. The story of a woman who gave until she became invisible, who loved until she forgot the sound of her own no. But no more. That night, I went through old photo albums, me and Thomas in the garden, David as a toddler covered in mud, his small hands reaching for mine. I looked at that little boy and whispered, "Where did you go, my son? What replaced you?" Then I found a picture of me on my wedding day, smiling shyly in a simple lace dress. Thomas had written on the back, "To my Clara, the woman who gives the world, even when it doesn't deserve it." I pressed the photo to my chest. "I'm done giving, Thomas," I said aloud. "It's time they learn what it means to lose." The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Janet Bell, Nancy's old co-worker, whose son was an attorney. The second was to myself, to whatever part of me still had courage left. Janet didn't hesitate. "I'll call my boy Marcus. He's good, fair, and he hates bullies." By that afternoon, I had an appointment. I changed out of my worn cardigan and into a white blouse Thomas always said made me look capable. For the first time in years, I looked in the mirror and didn't see a victim. I saw someone preparing for war. Marcus Adler's office sat above a florist shop on Main Street. The air smelled faintly of roses and ink. He greeted me with a firm handshake and eyes that didn't pity, they assessed. "My mother told me a little," he said, motioning to the chair. "Tell me everything." I did. From the first request to the last lie. I showed him my notebook, the bank transfers, the messages. Every detail, every date. When I finished, he leaned back and let out a slow breath. "Mrs. Winslow, I've seen a lot of cases of financial exploitation, but rarely with this much proof. You've documented everything." "I didn't mean to," I said quietly. "It just helped me breathe." He nodded. "You've done the hardest part, recognizing the abuse. Now we'll do the second hardest part, reclaiming what's yours." His words didn't sound like revenge. They sounded like resurrection. When I left his office, the sunset painted the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. For a moment, I imagined Thomas standing beside me, his hand warm on my shoulder, whispering, "About time, Clara." I smiled for the first time in months. The battle hadn't started yet, but I'd already won the first victory. I was no longer afraid of my own strength. If you've ever found yourself forgiving someone who only sees your love as leverage, remember this. Silence is not kindness, it's consent. And I had just revoked mine. The morning after meeting Marcus, I woke before dawn, not from fear but from clarity. There's a strange stillness that comes after you've stopped begging the world to be kind. It's the sound of your soul clicking back into place. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, notebook open, reading every line like scripture. Each date, each amount, each fake reason, together they told a single story, not of a foolish mother, but of a woman who believed love meant rescue. Not anymore. By 8 a.m., I was at the bank, face to face with Simone, the branch manager who'd known me for 20 years. She'd watched me deposit my first paycheck as a young nurse, seen me open my joint account with Thomas, even hugged me the day he died. Now she saw something different in my eyes. "Clara," she said softly, "are you all right?" "I need every bank statement from the past 3 years," I said. "Every transfer, every cent that went to my son's account." Her eyebrows lifted, but she didn't ask why. She just printed the stack 27 pages thick and handed them over gently, like they were something fragile. As I gathered them, she reached across the counter. "If you need an official letter verifying anything, just say the word." I nodded. I might. I carried that stack home like it was a coffin. Each page a gravestone for one more piece of trust buried too soon. Marcus called that afternoon. "Good timing," he said. "Let's build your case." We met in his office again, surrounded by the faint hum of a printer and the scent of paper and roses drifting up from the florist below. He laid out a plan that was both brilliant and cruel in its precision. "Legally," he explained, "most of these transfers are considered informal family gifts. The law can't punish a parent for generosity, but," he raised a finger, "if we frame them as loans given under false pretenses, backed by evidence of deceit, we can create pressure. He'll think he's cornered, and that's when he'll fold." I frowned. Fold? He'll pay you back, Marcus said calmly, because you'll give him no other choice. I didn't want to destroy my son. I wanted to educate him. And this was the kind of lesson he couldn't ignore. What do you need from me? I asked. Every receipt, every screenshot, every message where he asked for money. Witnesses, if you have them. I have Nancy, I said, and my friend Janet. They've both warned me for years. Perfect, he said. We'll need brief statements. Nothing fancy, just truth. That night, I turned detective. I pulled my laptop out of the cabinet, opened my emails, and began digging through digital dust. I found them all transfers, payment confirmations, and messages that now read like a textbook on emotional blackmail. Mom, please. Lydia's sick. You don't want her in pain, do you? It's just a loan, I swear. You'll get it back soon. I hate asking you again, but you're the only one I can count on. Each word once made my heart ache with sympathy. Now they made my stomach twist with disgust. I copied them into a folder titled Evidence, Winslow Case. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had been my life's work. Now he was my case file. 2 days later, Nancy came over with her reading glasses and a notepad. All right, detective, she said. What do you need from me? A witness statement, I said. Everything you remember, when I told you about the requests, when you saw me losing weight, skipping meals, crying. She set down her purse and got to work, muttering as she wrote. If this doesn't teach that boy of yours a lesson, nothing will. Janet mailed hers the next day, 3 pages of handwritten honesty describing how she lent me money once so I could help David, and how she'd watched me fade year by year. When I handed both letters to Marcus, he nodded approvingly. We're ready. Ready for what? I asked. He smiled. To start the clock on your son's reckoning. The next morning, I stood in the sunlight of my kitchen, surrounded by organized stacks, receipts, bank statements, witness letters, and my old notebook, its spine worn, pages yellowing. For the first time, those pages didn't feel like shame. They felt like evidence. Proof that I had survived a slow theft of my soul and still found the courage to reclaim it. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. Not just tidying, cleansing. I scrubbed the counters, polished the frames, opened every window to let in air that hadn't known the weight of guilt. When I was done, I lit a candle beside Thomas's photo. Wish me luck, I whispered. Tomorrow, he'll walk into this house and meet the woman you married, not the one grief turned soft. That night, I rehearsed. In front of the mirror, I practiced the lines Marcus told me to use: firm, direct, unshakable. No, David. Today you listen. I'm not your bank. You'll sign what's fair or face what's coming. I practiced until my reflection didn't look afraid anymore. Marcus called again around sunset. We're set for tomorrow? Yes. He doesn't know I'll be there? He thinks I'll be alone. Good, Marcus said. That'll make the shock cleaner. His tone wasn't cruel, it was protective, like a surgeon explaining how much pain a necessary operation would cause. After we hung up, I sat in silence. I could almost hear Thomas's voice saying, "You're finally fighting smart." Before going to bed, I pulled the pink and blue baby blanket from its case. I folded it neatly, placed it beside the folder of evidence, and whispered to it, "You were supposed to warm a baby. Instead, you'll expose a liar." Then I wrote one final entry in my notebook. Tomorrow, justice. If you've ever been betrayed so quietly that you forgot what your own voice sounds like, let me tell you this. Once you find it again, it's the most powerful weapon in the world. And I was about to use mine. The 5th day of the month came like a summons. For 3 years, it had meant one thing. David arriving with another excuse, another performance, another withdrawal from the bank of mother. But this time, the teller window was closed. The house was immaculate. Every photo straightened, every chair in its place. The scent of lemon polish hung in the air like quiet authority. On the coffee table lay a neat stack of papers, bank statements, signed letters, printed screenshots, all secured with a black ribbon. Beside them sat Marcus's leather briefcase and, like a quiet tombstone, the folded pink and blue baby blanket. He arrived at noon. Same key in the lock, same forced brightness in his voice. "Mom, you home?" I stepped out of the kitchen, heart pounding, but face calm. "In here." When he entered, he froze. Marcus was already seated in the armchair, Thomas's old chair, hands folded, expression unreadable. The weight of authority filled the room. David blinked. "Who's this?" Marcus stood extending a hand. Marcus Adler, your mother's attorney. For a long, terrible second, silence stretched between us. Then color drained from David's face. Attorney? Mom, what's going on? Sit down, I said. Why is he? Sit. He's Saturday. Marcus opened his briefcase and laid out the documents one by one with surgeon-like precision. These, he said evenly, are the records of every transfer from your mother to your account over the last 3 years, totaling $47,300. David's jaw slackened. That's not Mom. I told you those were just temporary loans. Marcus slid a printed message across the table. You're the only one I can count on. That's not a loan request, Mr. Winslow. That's emotional coercion. David stammered. What is this? You're suing me. I spoke softly. No, not yet. He turned to me, his voice breaking. Mom, you can't do this. I'm your son. I met his eyes, those same green eyes that once begged for bedtime stories, now clouded by guilt and disbelief. A son doesn't invent a pregnancy for money, David. A son doesn't call his mother a fool behind her back. He flinched. What are you talking about? I heard Lydia, I said quietly, at Rosewood Market, talking about how easy it was to milk the old woman. You remember that, don't you? The $5,000 for the baby that never existed? He stared at me, stunned. Then the panic came, wild and cornered. She lied. She used me. Mom, I didn't know. I opened the folder and slid the printed photos toward him. Then explain these. Mexico, the new car, the wine, the restaurants, every one of them dated within a day of your emergencies. He went silent. Marcus leaned forward. Mr. Winslow, we can settle this quietly. You'll repay $30,000, roughly 2/3 over the next 2 years, $1,000 a month. A written contract will ensure that if you default, we'll take it to court as a fraud case. David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I said, if you refuse, I'll press charges, and you'll explain to a judge why your wife bragged about exploiting your mother for vacations. His shoulders collapsed. The proud man in front of me crumbled into the frightened boy I used to protect. He whispered, please don't do this. You'll destroy me. No, I said. I'm saving what's left of me. He signed. His hand shook so badly that the pen squeaked across the paper. Marcus notarized the signature, then gathered the copies and closed his briefcase with a decisive click that echoed through the house like a verdict. When Marcus left, David lingered at the door, eyes red. Mom, I don't know what to say. Say nothing, I said. You've said enough. He hesitated, then whispered, I'm sorry. I nodded, but didn't reply. He walked away without another word. When the door closed, the silence that followed wasn't emptiness, it was relief. For the first time in years, the air felt breathable. I sat down on the couch, the documents still on the table, the baby blanket beside them. I picked it up, pressing it to my chest, and sobbed not for the money, not even for the betrayal, but for the years I'd spent begging love to look like sacrifice. Nancy and Janet arrived soon after, worried. When I told them everything, Janet cupped my face in her hands. You did it, Clara. You finally drew the line. I didn't win, I said through tears. I just stopped losing. Nancy nodded. That's what winning looks like, sweetheart. That night, I walked out into the backyard. The apple trees were bare under the pale moonlight, their branches skeletal against the sky. I thought of Thomas again, his laughter, his faith in me, the way he used to say, "You're tougher than you think." And for once I believed him, because I had proven it not to my son, not to the world, but to myself. The next morning, Marcus called. He's transferred the first payment, he said. I checked my account. 10 yuan, $1,000, not from guilt or gratitude, but from accountability. It was the first honest money my son had ever given me, and as I sat there, coffee warm in my hands, I whispered to the empty kitchen, it's not revenge, it's reclamation. If you've ever had to choose between keeping your dignity or keeping someone who doesn't respect it, choose yourself. Every time. Because love without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. And I was done surrendering. The days after the confrontation felt like standing in a house after a storm, the roof still intact, but everything inside slightly rearranged. There was peace, yes, but also the echo of everything that had just broken. The first few mornings, I still half expected to hear the knock at the door, the too bright voice, the rehearsed smile. Instead, I woke to silence, and the soft hum of my own breathing. Freedom is quiet at first, painfully quiet. The first $1,000 sat in my account like an apology written in numbers. I didn't touch it. Not for groceries, not for bills. I just looked at it every morning as a reminder. This is what self-respect looks like. It pays interest you can't see. Nancy visited with cinnamon bread 2 days later. She found me in the kitchen, the morning sun spilling across the floor. "So," she said, tearing off a piece. "How's it feel?" "Like I've exhaled for the first time in 3 years," I said. Then I laughed a small, surprised laugh that felt like it belonged to someone younger. And like I might cry again any second. Nancy smiled knowingly. "That's what healing sounds like, honey. Messy and human." That night, I stood by the window, the same spot where I'd once waited for David's car to pull into the driveway. Now, the empty street looked beautiful. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was watching. Every time I caught myself feeling guilty, and I did, often I repeated what Marcus told me. "You're not punishing him, Clara. You're teaching him accountability. Even love must have rules." Those words became my mantra. By the second month, the payments arrived like clockwork. February. March. Each one, a quiet symbol that I had shifted something fundamental, not just in my son, but in myself. Still, the nights were long. I found myself replaying everything. The fake pregnancy, the laughter in the supermarket, the word pathetic. That word still stung. But over time, I began to understand something. They hadn't laughed at me because I was weak. They laughed because I was generous, and they mistook kindness for stupidity. And now they knew the difference. In April, I used the second payment to fix the leaking roof. It had dripped every time it rained for 2 years, and every time I had told myself, next month, when things get better. But next month had always belonged to someone else's need. This one was mine. When the workers left, I stood outside in the drizzle, watching the new shingles gleam dark in the rain. It felt symbolic, as if I'd patched something deeper than a roof. That same week, Marcus called to check in. "Any issues with the payments?" he asked. "No," I said. "He's on time." "Good. Keep every record. Don't delete a single message or receipt." I hesitated. "Do you think he hates me?" He paused. "Maybe right now, but sometimes hate is just the mask guilt wears when it's not ready to face itself. Give it time." After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long while, turning that over in my mind. Time, it didn't heal everything, but it revealed what was real. By June, the rhythm of my life changed. I stopped checking my phone for his messages. I started buying groceries without budgeting to the penny. I even planted marigolds by the mailbox, something I hadn't done since Thomas died. One afternoon, while watering the flowers, I heard laughter. Children playing across the street, their voices high and wild. It filled the air, and for a moment, I felt the heaviness lift. It struck me then. This was what survival looked like. Not grand gestures, not revenge, just quiet, ordinary days that didn't hurt anymore. In early July, a small envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a folded note and a pressed flower, a forget-me-not. The note said only 4 words. "I'm trying, Mom. D." No money, no excuses, no manipulation. Just that. I sat at the kitchen table holding it, unsure whether to cry or smile. Maybe both. I didn't reply. Not yet. Some things need to grow in silence first. That night, I made a cup of tea and stepped outside. The marigolds glowed under the porch light. I thought of the thousands he still owed me and how, for the first time, I didn't care about the number. I cared about the effort, about the note, about the fact that maybe, just maybe, there was a man inside the boy I'd raised after all. Forgiveness doesn't arrive in one sweeping moment. It creeps in slowly, disguised as peace. And that night, peace finally knocked on my door. By late August, the world had shifted around me. The air no longer felt heavy when I woke up. The mornings held quiet, steady rhythm. The apple trees bore fruit again, and for the first time in years, I had enough peace to taste their sweetness without bitterness behind it. The payments kept arriving on schedule. $12,000 so far. I didn't celebrate, but every deposit was a quiet pulse of justice, a reminder that I had survived something I once thought would break me. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter, handwritten. The envelope bore David's familiar scrawl, shaky but deliberate. For a moment, I just stared at it, afraid of what it might contain. Then I opened it. "Mom, I know I've said sorry before, but this time it's not a plea, it's just truth. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know I'm trying." After Lydia left, I thought the silence would kill me, but it didn't. It's teaching me how to listen, really listen to the people I've hurt, even if their voices live only in my memory now. I started seeing a counselor. He said guilt is useless unless you use it to rebuild what you've broken. I've started paying back my debts, not just money, but the kind you owe to yourself when you lose who you are. You didn't just stand up to me that day. You saved me from the man I was becoming. I don't deserve to call you Mom, but I hope one day you'll let me earn that title back. David. I read it 3 times. Then I set it down and cried, not the desperate sobs of before, but the kind that release something trapped inside your chest, slow, grateful, cleansing. Maybe this was what redemption looked like. Not erasing the past, but learning to stand beside it without shame. The following week, Nancy came by with fresh pie. I showed her the letter. She read it silently, then looked up at me. "Do you believe him?" I thought for a moment. "I believe he wants to believe himself." "That's a start," she said softly. It was. In October, I made a small trip, the first since Thomas's death. Just 2 days by the sea, staying at a quiet inn where the air smelled of salt and possibility. I brought my knitting and my notebook. I didn't write about pain this time. I wrote about beginnings. The ocean has a way of forgiving everything it touches. Each wave seemed to whisper, "You're still here, Clara." By winter, the house had changed too. New paint, new curtains, and the old creaking door finally fixed. Sometimes, I caught myself humming while washing dishes, a small miracle I didn't notice until Nancy pointed it out. "You're glowing," she said, handing me a mug of cocoa. "Maybe I'm just done living in the dark." She smiled. "You think he'll visit for Christmas?" "Maybe," I said, then after a pause, "and maybe I'll let him." December came with soft snow and silence. On Christmas Eve, a car pulled up to my driveway. I didn't need to look. I knew that sound. David stepped out, dressed plainly, holding a small paper bag. He hesitated at the porch, then smiled weakly. "Can I come in?" I nodded. "Of course." Inside, he handed me the bag. Inside was a single ornament, a tiny glass heart, clear and fragile. "I saw it at a street market," he said. "Thought of you. Because you're stronger than you look." I hung it on the tree beside a faded ornament Thomas had given me decades ago. For a moment, it caught the light, and the whole room glowed golden. We sat in silence for a while, drinking tea. He didn't apologize again, and I didn't ask him to. Some apologies only matter once they're lived, not spoken. When he left, he hugged me carefully, as if afraid I might break. But I didn't. I never would again. That night, as I sat by the fire, I opened my notebook for the last time. On the final page, I wrote, "I once thought motherhood meant endless giving. Now I know it means teaching when to stop. Love without limits isn't love, it's surrender. And today, I am loved by myself." I closed the book. The chapter was over. If you're listening, and you've ever mistaken endurance for love, hear this. You are allowed to stop saving people who keep drowning you. You are allowed to be your own rescue. And when you do, the world won't end, it will finally begin. Spring came early the next year, brushing the town in soft greens and morning gold. The air smelled like new beginnings, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was watching life from behind a window pane. I was in it again, breathing, moving, living. The payments were nearly done. Each month, the quiet buzz of a new transfer arrived like clockwork, and with every one, a little more of my past lost its weight. There was no more bitterness, just distance. I had stopped counting the money and started counting what it brought back. My peace, my confidence, my laughter. When I looked at my bank balance now, I didn't see what David owed me. I saw what I had reclaimed. That April, Marcus called out of the blue. "Clara," he said, his voice warm. "I wanted to let you know I'm closing your file. Debt's almost complete. Congratulations." I smiled. "Feels strange to think of it as complete." He chuckled. "That's because this wasn't just a legal case. It was a life audit. You didn't just get justice, you got yourself back. Thank you, Marcus, for everything." "Don't thank me," he said. "You did the hardest part. You faced your own heart and still stood tall. After the call, I stood at the kitchen window for a long time, watching a pair of birds build a nest under the eaves. They moved in perfect rhythm, fetching twigs, weaving, rebuilding. I smiled to myself. That's what I was doing too. Rebuilding. Nancy insisted on celebrating the last payment. "We're having a little dinner," she said over the phone. "Just me, you, and Janet. No excuses." When I arrived, the table was set with candles and apple pie. "To Clara Winslow," Nancy announced, raising her glass. "The woman who taught all of us that strength isn't about fighting back, it's about standing your ground." I laughed. "Don't make me sound heroic. I just got tired of losing." "That's exactly what heroes do," Janet said. We toasted. For the first time in a long while, the clinking of glasses didn't sound hollow. It sounded like life. The following month, on an unusually bright Sunday, there was another knock on my door. When I opened it, David stood there, not with a gift, not with guilt, but with quiet eyes that had finally aged into humility. He carried a small box. "This is the last payment," he said. "I wanted to give it to you in person." I didn't reach for it immediately. "You've already transferred everything, haven't you?" He nodded. "Yes, but this one, this last bit, I wanted you to hold it, to see that I'm not just paying a debt, I'm closing a wound." The box was light. Inside was a check for the final 1,000 and a folded sheet of paper. I opened it and saw not numbers, but words. "Mom, I used to think you stopped loving me when you made me sign that contract. But now I know that's when you started loving me right. You didn't save me from the consequences. You saved me from myself. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be a son worthy of the mother who taught me that love isn't giving, it's guiding. Thank you for not giving up on me. David." I looked up. His eyes met mine, steady and clear. There was no manipulation this time, no guilt, no performance, just truth. I reached out, took his hand, and said softly, "You've already done what matters most, David. You grew up." That summer, the garden bloomed wilder than ever. Yellow roses climbed the fence, and the apple trees hummed with bees. I planted lavender along the walkway, so that each evening the scent would greet me on my way back from my walks. Nancy joked that my house looked like something out of a painting. But to me, it wasn't beauty, it was survival, flowering. One evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the air thick with the scent of rain. David's car pulled up quietly, and he stepped out with a small girl, his niece, my grandniece, the daughter of his cousin who'd moved away years ago. He waved from the gate. "Mom," he said gently, "thought you might like some company." The child ran up the path, holding a bouquet of clumsy wildflowers. "For you," she squealed. I took them, laughing. "Thank you, sweetheart." As they left later, I stood watching their silhouettes fade down the street. The sky blushed with sunset, and I felt something shift inside me, soft and full. I realized that love hadn't died after all. It had just changed shape. That night, I pulled out my old notebook, the one that had once held every record of my pain. I flipped past all the numbers, the evidence, the tears pressed between lines. On a fresh page at the end, I wrote, "Debt paid, dignity restored, love reborn." Then I closed the notebook for good and placed it in a drawer, beside Thomas's photo. I don't tell this story because it's tragic. I tell it because it's true, because too many of us mistake silence for grace, giving for love, and endurance for strength. But real strength isn't what you give away, it's what you decide to keep. And when I chose to keep my self-respect, I didn't lose my son. I found him. So if you've ever felt drained by those you love, if you've ever asked yourself when enough is enough, maybe this is your sign. You're not cruel for setting boundaries. You're brave for doing what love itself couldn't. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is say no.